London, 1884. They called him the Ice Duke, a man who froze hearts as easily as he crushed fortunes. I was just a pawn in his game, or so he thought. Standing in his study while the rain lashed against the glass, Sebastian Sterling threw a ledger onto his desk. "Your father's debts are catastrophic, Lady Seraphina. You have two choices: watch your family name burn in the gutter, or wear my ring and warm my bed." I hated him then. I wanted to see him break. I never imagined that the one who would shatter would be him. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a footman whose livery was far too expensive for the drab, peeling paint of the Blackwood entryway. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. Lady Seraphina Blackwood stared at the heavy cream paper, the wax seal embossed with the snarling wolf of the Alastair crest. Her fingers trembled just slightly. Her father, Lord Henry Blackwood, was currently passed out in the library, a bottle of cheap gin his only companion. The creditors had stopped knocking weeks ago. Now they just lurked, silent and predatory. But this was different. Sebastian Sterling, the Duke of Alastair. He was a man whispered about in ballrooms and feared in boardrooms. They said he had turned his father's failing estate into an empire of steel and shipping through sheer ruthlessness. They said he didn't have a heart, just a clockwork mechanism that ticked in his chest, calculating profit and loss. And he wanted to see her. Immediately. The carriage ride to Sterling House was a blur of rain-streaked windows and biting cold. Seraphina wore her best dress, a navy silk that had been turned twice and was starting to fray at the cuffs. She held her head high, her auburn hair pinned severely back. She was 22, past the prime age for a debutante, and hardened by 3 years of managing a household that was crumbling around her ears. Sterling House was a fortress of grey stone in Mayfair, imposing and utterly devoid of warmth. The butler, a man named Henderson, who looked as if he'd been carved from granite, led her silently to the study. "His Grace will see you now." The doors opened and Seraphina stepped into the lion's den. The room was vast, lined with books that looked like they were read, not just displayed. A fire roared in the hearth, but it did nothing to dispel the chill in the air. Standing by the window, looking out at the deluge, was the Duke. He turned slowly. Sebastian Sterling was devastatingly handsome, in the way a storm is beautiful before it tears a roof off. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair as black as the coal that fueled his ships. But it was his eyes that pinned her in place, steel grey, sharp, and utterly devoid of kindness. "Lady Seraphina," he said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth like expensive whiskey. "You are punctual. I appreciate that." "Your Grace," Seraphina curtsied, though she kept her chin level. "Your note implied urgency. Is this about my father?" In a manner of speaking, he moved to his desk, a massive slab of mahogany, and picked up a thick ledger. He dropped it with a heavy thud. "Do you know what this is?" "It looks like a ledger," she replied, her throat dry. "It is a record of debt. Specifically, Lord Blackwood's debt." To me, Seraphina felt the blood drain from her face. To you. I thought he owed the banks. The gaming hells in Cheapside. He did, Sebastian said, walking around the desk to lean against it, crossing his arms. I bought them. All of them. Every promissory note, every IOU, every drunken scrawl on a napkin. I own his debts, Serafino. Which means, effectively, I own him. And you cannot own people, Your Grace. This is England, not a feudal fiefdom. Is it? He smirked, a cruel, mirthless twisting of lips. Your father has gambled away your dowry, the deed to Blackwood Hall, and even the jewels your mother left you. If I call in this debt tonight, which I am perfectly within my rights to do, your father goes to debtor's prison. You will be on the street before morning. The scandal will be absolute. No one will hire you. No one will house you. Serafina gripped her reticule so tightly her knuckles turned white. She knew it was bad, but she hadn't realized it was this bad. Why, she whispered. Why buy the debts? What do you want? Sebastian pushed off the desk and closed the distance between them. He smelled of rain, sandalwood, and raw power. He stopped inches from her, forcing her to look up. I require a wife. The words hung in the air, absurd and terrifying. Serafina blinked. I beg your pardon, I need a duchess. Specifically, I need a wife of noble blood, with an unblemished reputation, personally at least, before my 30th birthday to access the trust my grandfather set aside. That birthday is in 3 weeks. There are hundreds of women who would throw themselves at your feet, Serafina argued, her heart hammering against her ribs. Beautiful, wealthy women. I don't want a woman who wants me for my money, Sebastian said coldly. And I don't want a love match. Love makes men weak. It makes them irrational. I want a business transaction. I want you, me, she let out a disbelief laugh. I have nothing to offer you, on the contrary. You have the Blackwood name, which is ancient, even if tarnished. You are known to be sensible, devoid of the flighty hysterics of the debutantes. And most importantly, I hold the leash, he gestured to the ledger. Marry me, Serafina. Be the Duchess of Alisteo. Run my house, host my dinners, produce an heir. In exchange, I will wipe your father's debt clean. I will restore Blackwood Hall. Your father will be sent to a comfortable sanitarium in the Swiss Alps to dry out, far away from the gaming tables. And if I refuse, Sebastian's eyes darkened. Then I destroy you. Tomorrow morning, the bailiffs arrive. The story of your father's corruption, and let's be honest, it goes beyond gambling, doesn't it? The embezzled funds from the orphanage board, Serafina gasped. She thought she had buried that secret. You know, I know everything. If you refuse, that story hits the Times. You will be pariahs. Tears strung her eyes, hot and angry. She looked at this man, this beautiful, terrible monster, and felt a surge of hatred so pure it almost choked her. He had cornered her. He had hunted her family down, catalogued their weaknesses, and was now holding a knife to their collective throat. This is blackmail, she hissed. This is negotiation, he countered smoothly. I am offering you a life of luxury, stability, and protection. All you have to do is say yes." Serafina looked around the room. It felt like a cage. She thought of her father, pathetic and broken, but still her father. She thought of the orphanage scandal, the shame that would follow her forever. She looked back at Sebastian. His face was unreadable, a mask of aristocratic indifference. But deep in those grey eyes, she saw a flicker of something else. Urgency. Desperation. No, surely not. The Duke of Alastair didn't get desperate. "I have conditions," she said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. Sebastian raised a brow. "You are hardly in a position to bargain, my dear. If I am to sell myself to you, I will set the terms of the sale. 1. My father goes to the best facility, and you never speak to him again. 2. I have my own allowance, independent of your oversight. And 3. She took a breath. "We live separate lives. I will be your duchess in public. I will run your house. But in private, you leave me alone. I will not share your bed." Sebastian studied her for a long, agonizing moment. The silence stretched, heavy with the sound of the rain. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to tilt her chin up. His fingers were warm, sending a jolt of electricity through her skin that she instantly resented. "The first 2 are acceptable," he murmured, his thumb brushing her jawline. "But the 3rd. We need an heir, Serafina. That requires a certain degree of cooperation. Then we do what is necessary for an heir," she said, her face burning. "And nothing more. No affection. No pretense of caring. You said you didn't want love. Fine. You shall not have it. You will have my hand, your grace, but you will never, ever have my heart." Sebastian stared at her, and for a second she thought he might be impressed. A shadow of a smile played on his lips. "A deal, then." He didn't offer his hand to shake. Instead, he leaned down, his face inches from hers. "Prepare yourself, Serafina. The wedding will be in 3 days. Do not try to run. My reach is long and my patience is short. I wouldn't dream of it," she lied. "Good," he pulled back, the cold mask slipping back into place. "Henderson will drive you home. Get some sleep. You look terrible." Serafina turned on her heel and marched out of the room, her spine rigid. She didn't look back. If she had, she might have seen the Duke of Alastair slump slightly against his desk, exhaling a breath he had been holding, his hand trembling just as hers had. She stepped out into the rainy London night, the cold air hitting her flushed cheeks. She was engaged to a monster. She had sold her freedom to save her family. "I will survive this," she vowed to the dark sky. "I will take his money, I will wear his jewels, and I will be the perfect ice queen for the Ice Duke. But I will make him regret the day he threatened me." But as the carriage rattled away, Serafina Blackwood didn't know that the game had only just begun. And in the shadows of Stirling House, secrets were festering, secrets about why Sebastian really needed a wife so desperately, and why he had chosen her, specifically, out of all the women in London. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the revenge he had been planning for 20 years. And she had just walked right into the center of the trap. The wedding was an execution disguised as a ceremony. It took place 3 days later in a small private chapel on the outskirts of London, far from the prying eyes of the ton who were already whispering about the sudden match. Rain battered the stained glass windows, casting the interior in gloomy shades of violet and grey. Serafina stood at the altar, her hands ice-cold. She wore a gown of heavy ivory silk, the corset laced so tight she could barely breathe. It was a beautiful dress, commissioned by Sebastian himself, but to her it felt like a shroud. Her father was not there to give her away. Sebastian had already shipped him off to the sanitarium in Zurich, efficiently removing the stain on his new family's reputation before the ink was even dry on the marriage license. Instead, she walked down the aisle alone. Sebastian waited for her at the altar. He looked devastating in black formal wear, his posture rigid. When she reached him, he didn't smile. He didn't offer a reassuring squeeze of the hand. He simply took her fingers in his grip firm, possessive, devoid of warmth, and turned to the priest. "Dearly beloved," the priest began, his voice trembling slightly under the Duke's intense glow. They spoke the vows. To have and to hold. A lie. To love and to cherish. A mockery. Until death do us part. That felt like a promise. When the time came for the kiss, Sebastian lifted her veil. His eyes searched hers, looking for fear, looking for submission. Serafina met his gaze with a defiance that surprised even her. "I am here because you forced me," her eyes said. "But you have not won." He leaned in, his lips brushing hers for a fleeting second. It was dry, chaste, and purely performative. Yet as he pulled away, he whispered, low enough that only she could hear, "Don't look at me like a martyr, Serafina. You're a survivor. Act like one." The ride to his ancestral estate, Greystone Manor, took hours. They sat opposite each other in the carriage, the silence thick and suffocating. Sebastian read documents, ignoring her completely. Serafina stared out at the passing countryside, watching the green fields of England turn grey under the storm. Greystone was a monstrosity of Gothic architecture, looming on a cliff overlooking a turbulent sea. It was beautiful in a savage, lonely way. As the carriage pulled up, a line of servants waited in the rain. "Welcome home, Your Grace," said the housekeeper, Mrs. Halloway. She was a thin woman with a face like a pinched lemon and eyes that assessed Serafina and found her lacking. "And Your Grace, Mrs. Halloway," Sebastian said, helping Serafina down, not out of chivalry, but because the cobblestones were slick. "Prepare the master suite," Serafina froze. "The master suite," Sebastian turned to her, his expression unreadable. "We are married, Serafina. Appearances must be maintained, but the deal," she started to hiss. Inside, he cut her off. "We do not discuss terms in front of the staff." Dinner was a silent affair in a dining room large enough to host a cavalry regiment. Serafina pushed peas around her plate. Sebastian ate with mechanical precision. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock and the howling wind outside. Then came the night. Serafina stood in the center of the master's suite, a cavernous room dominated by a massive four-poster bed draped in dark velvet. She had dismissed her maid early, terrified of the girls seeing her tremble. She wore a silk nightgown that had been laid out for her, another gift from him, another chain. The door handle turned. Serafina stiffened, clutching the back of a chair. Sebastian entered. He had discarded his coat and cravat, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the hollow of his throat. He looked tired. He looked dangerous. He locked the door behind him. The click echoed like a gunshot. "You look like you're facing a firing squad," he observed dryly, walking over to pour himself a brandy. "I am facing a man who blackmailed me into marriage," she retorted, though her voice shook. "You said separate lives in." "Private, I said we needed an heir," Sebastian corrected, swirling the amber liquid. He turned to face her. "But I am not a barbarian, despite what the rumors say." He walked toward her. Serafina forced her feet to stay planted. "Do not run. Do not cower." He stopped a foot away. The scent of him, sandalwood and brandy, was overwhelming. He reached out and she flinched. He paused, his hand hovering near her face. His eyes narrowed, a flash of something almost like irritation crossing his features. "I have no interest in forcing myself on a terrified woman," he said coldly. "It offers me no pleasure." He walked past her towards a velvet chaise lounge near the fireplace. He grabbed a pillow and a heavy fur throw. "Take the bed, Serafina," she blinked confused. "What, take the bed?" he repeated, lying down on the chaise and crossing his legs at the ankles. "I will sleep here. The servants check the sheets. They talk. If I sleep in another room on our wedding night, the scandal will be in London by breakfast. So we share the room. But you keep your virtue and I keep my sanity." Serafina stared at him. The Ice Duke, the monster who had ruined her father, was voluntarily sleeping on a cramped sofa to spare her. "Why?" she asked softly. He didn't open his eyes. "Because you are a business asset, Serafina. And one does not damage valuable assets on the first day of acquisition. Now go to sleep. And stop breathing so loudly. It's annoying." Serafina climbed into the massive, cold bed. She lay on the very edge, as far from him as possible. She watched the firelight dance on the ceiling, listening to the steady, rhythmic breathing of the man who owned her life. She didn't sleep. And sometime around 3 in the morning, she heard him groan in his sleep, a sound of pure anguish. "No," he muttered into the dark. Don't make me choose." It was the first crack in the ice. 2 weeks into her marriage, Serafina realized that being the Duchess of Alastair was not a role, it was a battle. Sebastian was rarely seen. He spent his days in London or locked in his study at Greystone, managing his empire. Serafina was left to wander the drafty corridors of the manor, trying to impose order on a household that clearly resented her. Mrs. Halloway, the housekeeper, was the general of the opposition. The previous duchess preferred the linens folded this way, Mrs. Halloway would say with a sniff, correcting Serafina's instructions. Or His Grace does not like flowers in the hallway. He finds the scent distracting. Serafina, however, was not her father. She was not weak. The previous duchess is dead, Mrs. Halloway, Serafina said one morning, dropping a stack of menus onto the table. And His Grace is not here. I am. Put lilies in the hall. If he complains, send him to me. Mrs. Halloway's lips pursed so tight they disappeared, but she bobbed a curtsy. As you wish, Your Grace. It was a small victory, but Serafina took it. The manor was full of secrets. There was a wing, the west wing, that was always locked. Unsafe floorboards, Halloway had claimed. But Serafina had seen lights flickering in the windows, there late at night. One evening, Sebastian returned early from London. The tension in the house immediately ratcheted up. He looked exhausted, shadows bruising the skin under his eyes. They were eating dinner, another silent, torturous affair, when a footman entered with a silver tray. A letter, Your Grace. Marked urgent, Sebastian took it. He broke the seal, read the contents, and his face went terrifyingly pale. Then the pallor was replaced by a rage so intense the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He crumpled the letter in his fist. Is everything all right? Serafina asked tentatively. It does not concern you, he snapped. He stood up so abruptly, his chair fell backward with a crash. I will be in the West Wing. Do not disturb me. Under any circumstances, he stormed out. Serafina sat there, her heart pounding. The West Wing again. She waited an hour. Curiosity, dangerous and cat-like, clawed at her. She knew she should go to bed. She knew he had forbidden it. But she was the lady of the house, and she was tired of being treated like a guest in a hotel. She took a candelabra and made her way through the dark corridors. The house creaked, settling into the night. She reached the heavy oak doors of the West Wing. Locked. No. Tonight he had been in such a fury he had left it slightly ajar. She slipped inside. The air here was stale, smelling of dust and old memories. The furniture was covered in white sheets, looking like ghosts in the flickering candlelight. She followed the sound of. Was that music? Yes. A music box. Tinkling a sad, simple lullaby. She found him in a nursery. It was a child's room, preserved in amber. A rocking horse in the corner. A crib. And Sebastian, the Iron Duke, was sitting on the floor, his back against the crib, holding a small porcelain music box. He wasn't crying. Men like Sebastian Sterling didn't cry. But he looked broken. Serafina froze in the doorway. She should leave. This was a private grief, a wound she had no right to see. But before she could retreat, a floorboard creaked. Sebastian's head snapped up. The look on his face was terrifying. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was pure, unadulterated fury. He scrambled to his feet, placing the music box on a shelf with trembling hands, and stalked toward her. "I told you," he snarled, his voice a low growl, "never to come here. I was worried," Serafina stammered, backing away. "Worried," he laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. "You are not worried. You are nosy. You are looking for leverage. You want to know the tragic backstory of the monster so you can tell your friends." "I have no friends," she shouted back, fear giving way to anger. "You made sure of that. I am alone in this house, with a staff that hates me and a husband who treats me like a piece of furniture. I just wanted to know who you are." He grabbed her arm. His grip was hard, hurting her. He pulled her close, looming over her. "You want to know who I am? I am the man who owns you. I am the man who saved you from the gutter. And this room." He gestured around the dusty nursery. "This room is none of your business. It belongs to the past. And you are here for the future. Whose room is it?" she whispered, daring to ask. "A child." "Did you have a child?" Sebastian's face twisted. He shoved her away, releasing her arm as if she burned him. "Get out," he whispered. "Get out before I do something I regret." Serafina turned and ran. She ran all the way back to her room, locking the door and leaning against it, gasping for breath. She had seen something she wasn't supposed to. He had a child. A secret child. Or a dead one. The next morning, Sebastian was gone before she woke. But on her bedside table, there was a small velvet box. Inside lay a diamond necklace, a choker of sapphires and diamonds, cold and heavy. There was no note. It was an apology paid in currency, not emotion. 2 days later, the invitation arrived. The grand ball at the Duchess of Hertford's estate. It was the social event of the season, and it would be Serafina's debut as the Duchess of Alastair. She didn't want to go. She knew the whispers that would follow her. The bought bride. The gambler's daughter. But Sebastian returned that afternoon, looking composed, as if the scene in the nursery had never happened. "Where the sapphires?" he ordered, checking his pocket watch. "The carriage leaves at 8. The ball was a dazzling nightmare. Hundreds of candles, an ocean of silk and jewels, and eyes, hundreds of eyes judging her." Serafina held her head high, her hand resting lightly on Sebastian's arm. He was the perfect attentive husband, guiding her through the crowd, introducing her to powerful men and jealous women. "Ignore them," he murmured in her ear as a group of debutantes giggled behind their fans. "They are sheep. You are a wolf now." It was a strange compliment, but it bolstered her. Then Lord Finch appeared. Lord Finch was a slimy man, a former gambling associate of her father's who had tried to court Serafina a year ago. She had rejected him. He had not taken it well. He cornered her near the punch bowl while Sebastian, was speaking to the Prime Minister. Well, well, Finch sneered, looking her up and down. Lady Seraphina. Or should I say, Duchess? Quite a step up from dodging bailiffs at Blackwood Hall. Lord Finch, Seraphina said coldly. If you'll excuse me, he blocked her path. Don't be like that. We all know the truth. Sterling didn't marry you for your charm. He bought you to cover your father's mess. How much did you cost, Seraphina? Was it a flat rate, or does he pay by the hour? The insult was so loud, so crass, that the nearby conversation stopped. Faces turned. Seraphina felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She opened her mouth to retort, to eviscerate him, but a shadow fell over them. Sebastian was there. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He simply stepped between Seraphina and Finch. Sebastian was 3 inches taller than Finch and infinitely broader. Lord Finch, Sebastian said. His voice was conversational, pleasant even. I believe you dropped something, Finch blinked, confused. What, your dignity, Sebastian said. And your invitation, What, you insulted my wife, Sebastian continued, his voice dropping an octave, losing all pleasantness. And by extension, you insulted me. If you ever speak to her again, if you ever look at her again, I will buy the bank that holds the mortgage on your estate, and I will foreclose on it the same afternoon. Do you understand? Finch turned pale. Your Grace, it was a joke. Get out of my sight, Sebastian said softly. Finch fled. The ballroom was silent. Sebastian turned to Seraphina. He didn't ask if she was okay. He reached out and adjusted the sapphire necklace at her throat, his fingers brushing her pulse, which was hammering wildly. You are shaking, he noted. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me, he said, his eyes hard. You are my wife. No one insults what is mine. What is mine? Not who is mine. What? He viewed her as property. And yet, as he led her onto the dance floor for the waltz, placing a hand on her waist, Seraphina felt a confusing surge of safety. He was a monster, yes. But for the first time in her life, the monster was on her side. As they swirled around the floor, Sebastian looked down at her. You need to be tougher, Seraphina. Wolves will always circle if they smell blood. I am trying, she said. Try harder, but then he pulled her just a fraction closer. And for the rest of the dance, he didn't look at anyone else. The drive home was quiet, but the air was different. Less hostile. Charged. When they arrived at Greystone, Seraphina went to her room. She was unpinning her hair when she noticed something on her vanity. It was a ledger. Not the one from the study. A different one. Old, leather-bound. She opened it. It wasn't financial records. It was a diary. The handwriting was jagged, angry. She turned to the last entry, dated 20 years ago. Lord Blackwood was here tonight. He didn't just take the money. He took the locket, the one with Arthur's picture. If he doesn't return it, I will burn his house to the ground. Serafina gasped, dropping the book. The handwriting. It was Sebastian's father. And Arthur. She turned the page back. Arthur is dead. It was an accident, they say. But Blackwood was there. I know he saw what happened. He is blackmailing me for silence. Serafina's hand flew to her mouth. Her father hadn't just owed Sebastian money. Her father had been blackmailing Sebastian's family for 20 years about the death of a boy named Arthur. Sebastian hadn't married her for an heir. He hadn't married her for status. He had married her to get close enough to destroy the daughter of the man who had ruined his childhood. This wasn't a marriage. It was a long-con revenge. And she was the target. Serafina didn't sleep. The diary burned a hole in her mind, even after she hid it beneath the floorboards under her bed. For 3 days, she avoided Sebastian. She claimed a migraine, taking her meals in her room, listening for his footsteps in the hall. Every time he passed her door, her heart hammered against her ribs, not with fear, but with a sickening mixture of dread and betrayal. He hadn't married her to save her. He had married her to execute a slow, agonizing vengeance for a crime she didn't commit. On the 4th evening, the storm outside Greystone intensified. Thunder rattled the window panes, mirroring the turmoil inside. Serafina descended the stairs. She found him in the library, the very room where the deception had begun. He was drinking heavily. A crystal decanter of amber liquids sat half empty on the table. "You've been avoiding me," Sebastian said without turning around. He was staring into the fire, one hand resting on the mantelpiece. "I've been unwell," Serafina lied, stepping into the room. "You've been hiding." He turned then, his eyes bloodshot, his cravat undone. He looked less like a duke and more like a man haunting his own life. "Did you find it, Serafina?" "The diary," her breath hitched. "You knew, I know everything that happens in this house. Holloway told me you were in my father's old suite." He laughed, a low, bitter sound. "So now you know. You know you are sleeping in the house of the enemy." "Why?" Serafina demanded, her voice shaking. "Why marry me? If my father blackmailed your family, if he is responsible for Arthur, why not just destroy him? Why drag me into this hell?" Sebastian moved with terrifying speed. In 2 strides, he was in front of her. He slammed his hand against the bookshelf behind her, boxing her in. "Because destroying him wasn't enough," he roared. "Your father killed my brother. Arthur was 7 years old. 7. He drowned in the lake because your father was supposed to be watching him. Instead, he was drunk in the boathouse with a mistress. And when my father found out, Blackwood threatened to expose my father's own debts if the police were called. They called it an accident. They let Arthur rot in the ground without justice." Serafina gasped, tears springing to her eyes. I didn't know, of course you didn't. You were the precious daughter. The innocent flower. Sebastian's face was inches from hers, twisted in pain. I wanted to take everything from him. His name, his pride, his legacy. And his legacy is you. I wanted to marry you, make you dependent on me, and then break you. I wanted him to watch from that sanitarium as his beloved daughter was discarded, ruined, and left with nothing. Just like he left me with nothing. So do it, Serafina whispered, a tear tracking down her cheek. Throw me out. Ruin me. Finish your revenge, Sebastian. He stared at her. His chest heaved. The anger in his eyes warred with something else, something desperate and terrified. I can't, he choked out. Why? Because, he whispered, his voice cracking, somewhere between the plotting and the hatred. I started to admire you. I watched you fight for your family. I watched you handle my staff with grace. I watched you stand up to me. He leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. I hate you, Serafina. I hate that you are a Blackwood. But God help me, I cannot bring myself to hurt you anymore. That isn't love, she said softly, her hands coming up to push against his chest, though she didn't push hard. That is obsession. It is guilt, call it what you want. He opened his eyes, grey colliding with blue. But don't leave. Stay. Hate me if you must, but stay. Then he kissed her. It wasn't like the wedding kiss. This was violent, hungry, and full of 20 years of suppressed rage and desire. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, as if he could drown out the ghosts of the past with the heat of her body. Serafina knew she should push him away. He was her enemy. He had planned her destruction. But as his mouth moved over hers, demanding and desperate, she felt her own resistance crumble. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down. In the library, surrounded by the smell of old paper and rain, the Ice Duke burned. And Serafina burned with him. The morning after the confession, the dynamic of Greystone shifted. They were no longer strangers. They were accomplices in a strange, twisted intimacy. Sebastian was possessive, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He no longer slept on the chaise, he slept in the bed, holding her as if he expected her to vanish if he let go. But the ghost of Arthur still stood between them. Serafina couldn't let it go. Sebastian's version of events, that her father had been negligent and then blackmailed the Sterlings, didn't sit right. Her father was a drunk and a gambler, yes, but he had always been terrified of water. He wouldn't go near the boathouse. She needed the truth. 2 weeks later, Sebastian travelled to London for a parliamentary session. Serafina seized her chance. She ordered the carriage and rode to the village of Oakhaven, where the old parish records were kept. She found the former groundskeeper of Greystone, a man named Sealers, living in a small cottage near the church. He was ancient, his eyes clouded with cataracts, but his mind was sharp. Arthur Sterling, Silas wheezed, pouring tea with shaking hands. Lies. A tragedy, that was. The poor mite. My husband believes my father, Lord Blackwood, was responsible, Seraphina said gently. That he was drunk in the boathouse, Silas froze. He set the teapot down slowly. Is that what the old Duke told the boy? Told Sebastian, yes, lies, Silas spat. Filthy lies to cover a sin, Seraphina leaned forward. Tell me, Silas. Please, Lord Blackwood wasn't in the boathouse, Silas said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He was in the garden. It was the Duke, Sebastian's father, who was in the boat. He took Arthur out. He was the one who was drunk. He tipped the skiff. Blackwood. He dove in. He tried to save the boy. He nearly drowned himself pulling Arthur out, but it was too late. Seraphina felt the room spin. But the blackmail. The money, the old Duke paid Blackwood to take the blame, Silas revealed. He couldn't have the scandal of killing his own heir. He paid off your father's gambling debts in exchange for silence. Your father didn't blackmail the Duke, my lady. Your father sold his honor to save the Duke's reputation. He took the shame so Sebastian wouldn't know his own father killed his brother. Seraphina covered her mouth, a sob escaping. Her father wasn't the villain. He was a coward who took money to hide a crime, yes, but he hadn't killed Arthur. He had tried to save him. Sebastian had spent 20 years hating the man who had tried to save his brother. He had built his entire life, his entire revenge, on a lie told by his own father. She had to tell him. She raced back to Greystone. The storm had returned, lashing the coast with hurricane-force winds. When she arrived, the manor was in chaos. Your Grace, Mrs. Halloway cried, running into the hall. Thank God you're back. The Duke returned early. He went to the West Wing. He was shouting at the walls. Oh no, Seraphina whispered. She ran. She didn't bother with a candle. The lightning flashes illuminated the corridors. She reached the nursery in the West Wing. The door was smashed open. Inside, Sebastian was tearing the room apart. The crib was overturned. The rocking horse was smashed. He was destroying the shrine to his dead brother, screaming in a voice that sounded like raw agony. Sebastian, she screamed. He spun around. He was wild-eyed, bleeding from a cut on his hand. In his other hand, he held a lantern. It's all a lie, he yelled, waving the lantern dangerously close to the curtains. I found the letters. My father's letters. He hated me. He hated Arthur. Sebastian, put the lantern down, Seraphina pleaded, stepping over the debris. I know the truth. Silas told me, you know, he laughed hysterically. You know that my father killed him. You know that I have been punishing you for my family's sin. It doesn't matter, she cried. We can fix this, fix it. I broke you. I bought you like cattle. I planned to destroy you, he stumbled back. The lantern swung. It hit the velvet drapes. Worship. The fire caught instantly, fed by the dry, dusty fabric and the draft from the storm. In seconds, the wall of the nursery was a sheet of flame. Sebastian, he didn't move. He stood there, staring at the fire, as if welcoming the cleansing heat. He wanted to burn. He wanted to end the cycle. Serafina didn't think. She lunged. She tackled him, the force of her body hitting his solid frame. They crashed to the floor as a burning beam from the ceiling collapsed exactly where he had been standing a second before. "Get up," she screamed, coughing as thick black smoke filled the room. "We have to get out." Sebastian looked at her, dazed. He looked at the beam that had almost crushed him. Then he looked at Serafina, her face smeared with soot, her eyes fierce with the will to live. Reality snapped back into place. He grabbed her, shielding her body with his own, as the window exploded from the heat. He scooped her up into his arms and ran. They burst out of the west wing just as the roof groaned and caved in behind them. They collapsed in the hallway, gasping for air, covered in ash and sweat. Sebastian held her face in his hands, checking her frantically. "Are you hurt? Did I burn you?" "I'm fine," she coughed. "I'm fine." He pulled her into his chest and sobbed. The great Ice Duke, the monster of London, buried his face in her neck and wept like a child. The fire was contained to the west wing, but the damage to Sebastian's soul was far more extensive. In the days following the fire, he retreated. He didn't drink, he didn't rage. He simply shut down. He moved Serafina to the guest wing, far away from him. He stopped eating meals with her. He became a ghost in his own house. Serafina recovered from the smoke inhalation, but her heart was breaking all over again. She had saved his life. She had proven the truth. And now he was pushing her away. She found him 3 days later in the gardens, staring at the charred remains of the nursery tower. "Sebastian," she said softly. He flinched. He didn't turn to face her. "You should leave, Serafina." "What?" "I have instructed my solicitors to annul the marriage," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Or a divorce, if you prefer. I will grant you a settlement that will make you the richest woman in England. You can buy back Blackwood Hall. You can restore your name. You will be free." "I don't want a settlement," she said, stepping closer. "I want to know why you are sending me away." He finally turned. His eyes were dead. "Look at me. Look at what I did. I almost killed you. I spent months terrorizing you because I was too blind to see the truth. I am my father's son. I am poison, Serafina. I destroy everything I touch, so you're deciding for me," she challenged, anger flaring. "You're deciding that I'm too weak to handle you. I am deciding that you deserve better," he shouted, the first spark of life returning to him. "You deserve a man who didn't buy you. You deserve a man who didn't plan your ruin. Go, Serafina. Go before I drag you down into the dark with me again." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the ruins. Serafina stood there, trembling. He was right. She did deserve better. She deserved peace. She deserved a man who loved her simply, without 20 years of baggage. So she packed. It took her a day. She packed only what she had brought with her, her frayed dresses, her mother's locket. She left the sapphires. She left the silks. She ordered the carriage. It was raining again, a soft, sad drizzle, when she walked out the front doors of Greystone Manor. Henderson, the butler, looked genuinely sad as he held the door. "Goodbye, Your Grace," he murmured. "Goodbye, Henderson." She stepped onto the gravel. The carriage was waiting. She put her hand on the door handle. "Serafina," the shout tore through the air. She froze. She didn't turn. "Serafina, wait," footsteps running, splashing through puddles. "Sebastian." He caught up to her, grabbing her hand, spinning her around. He looked wild. His hair was wet, his shirt unbuttoned, his chest heaving. He looked like he had run all the way from hell's. "Don't," he gasped. "Don't get in that carriage. You told me to leave," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was breaking. "You said I deserved better. I lied." He dropped to his knees. Right there, on the wet gravel, in front of his staff, the Duke of Alastair dropped to his knees in the mud. He clutched her hands, pressing them to his face. "I lied," he sobbed. "I am selfish. I am a monster. I know I don't deserve you. I know I should let you go. But I can't. I can't breathe without you. The house is silent without you. My life is ash without you. Sebastian, get up," she whispered, looking around. "The servant." "Let them look," he cried, looking up at her, rain mixing with the tears on his face. "Let them see that I am nothing without you. I will beg. I will crawl. I will give up the title. I will give away the fortune. I will be Sebastian Sterling, a nobody, if that is what it takes for you to look at me without hate. I never hated you," she said softly. "I pitied you, then pity me enough to stay," he begged. "Please. I will spend every day of the rest of my life making up for what I did. I will worship you. I will protect you. Just don't leave me alone in the dark." Serafina looked down at him. This proud, arrogant man, completely undone by love. She saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't the Ice Duke anymore. The ice had melted, leaving only a man who was terrified of losing the only good thing he had ever found. She pulled her hands from his grip. Sebastian's face crumbled. He thought she was rejecting him. He bowed his head, defeated. But then she reached down. She took his face in her hands and lifted it. "You ruined my dress," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "This is mud, Sebastian." He blinked, confusion clouding his misery. I will buy you 1,000 dresses." "I don't want 1,000 dresses," she said. I want a husband who listens. I want a partner, not a master. And I want to know that the revenge is over. That the Blackwoods and the Sterlings are done fighting. It's over, he swore, clutching her waist as he stayed on his knees. It's dead. There is only us. Only you. Then stand up, Your Grace, she whispered. You're getting your trousers wet. He stood slowly, his eyes searching hers, hardly daring to hope. Does this mean? It means, Serafina said, that I am not going anywhere. But you have a lot of work to do. Sebastian let out a ragged breath, half laugh, half sob. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet, burying his face in her neck. Thank you, he whispered into her skin. Thank you. From the doorway, Mrs. Halloway wiped a tear from her eye and shooed the gawking footmen back inside. The storm had passed. The West Wing was gone, burned to the ground. But for the first time in 20 years, the sun was beginning to break through the clouds over Greystone Manor. 3 years had passed since the fire that consumed the West Wing of Greystone Manor. The charred ruins were gone. In their place stood a magnificent conservatory, a structure of glass and steel filled with exotic orchids and sunlight. It was Sebastian's wedding anniversary gift to Serafina, a promise that where there was once darkness and death, there would now only be light and life. It was Christmas Eve, 1887. Snow was falling softly over the estate, blanketing the grim grey stones in pristine white. Inside, the manor was unrecognizable. The heavy velvet drapes were gone, replaced by lighter silks. Fires roared in every hearth, and the sound of laughter, genuine, boisterous laughter, echoed through the halls. In the drawing room, Serafina sat near the fire, a book resting on her lap. She looked up as the doors opened. Lord Henry Blackwood walked in. He looked older, his hair completely white, but his eyes were clear. He walked with a cane, but his step was steady. The sanitarium in Zurich had done its work, but it was Serafina's forgiveness that had truly healed him. Papa, Serafina smiled, setting her book aside. My dear, Henry said, kissing her cheek. The house looks splendid. It does, doesn't it? Just then, the sound of thundering footsteps came from the hallway. Papa. Papa, look. A small boy, barely 2 years old with messy black hair and bright blue eyes, burst into the room. He was dragging a large wooden toy soldier. Chasing him was the Duke of Alastair. Sebastian Sterling, the man once feared as the Ice Duke, the man who had terrified boardrooms and crushed rivals, was on his hands and knees, pretending to be a bear. I'm going to get you, Leo, Sebastian roared playfully, catching the boy and tickling him until the room rang with high-pitched giggles. Henry Blackwood watched the scene, a complex expression on his face. He looked at the man who had once blackmailed him, the man whose father had ruined his life, and who was now the father of his grandson. Sebastian stood up, hoisting his son, Leo, onto his hip. He was breathless, his hair mussed, his face flushed with happiness. When he saw Henry, he didn't scowl. He didn't stiffen. Henry, Sebastian said warmly, extending a hand. Merry Christmas, Sebastian, Henry replied, shaking the hand firmly. The boy is fast. He takes after his mother, Sebastian grinned, looking at Serafina with a gaze so full of adoration it made her heart ache. Later that night, after the guests had gone and Leo was asleep in the new nursery, a room painted in soft yellows and filled with light, Sebastian found Serafina in the conservatory. She was looking out at the snowy night. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "You're thinking," he murmured. "I'm remembering," she corrected softly. "I'm remembering the night I arrived here. The rain. The ledger. The way you looked at me." Sebastian tightened. "Hold. Don't. I hate that man. I hate who I was. I don't." Serafina turned in his arms to face him. "Because that man was in pain. And he found his way out. You saved us, Sebastian. You broke the cycle." "No," he shook his head, his grey eyes soft. "You saved me. I was ready to burn in that fire, Serafina. You pulled me out. You forced me to see the truth about my father, about yours. About myself." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I never gave you a proper ring," he said. "The first one was a shackle. A mark of ownership." He opened the box. Inside was not a heavy diamond or a cold sapphire. It was a ring of intertwined gold and rose gold, set with a rare, warm pink diamond. "This," he whispered, sliding it onto her finger, "is a promise. A promise that I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the woman who thawed my heart." Serafina looked at the ring, then up at him. "You don't have to try anymore, Sebastian. You are," he kissed her then, deep and slow, under the glass roof of the conservatory, while the snow fell silently outside. The world still called him the Duke of Alastea. They still respected his power and his wealth. But only Serafina knew the truth. The Ice Duke was gone. In his place was a man who had learned that the only thing stronger than hate, the only thing that could truly destroy a legacy of pain, was the courage to love. And as he held her close, Sebastian Sterling finally, truly came home. And that is the story of how the cold Duke was brought to his knees, not by force, but by the undeniable power of the truth and a woman who refused to break. From a blackmail marriage to a love that healed two broken families, Sebastian and Serafina proved that even the coldest hearts can be thawed if you're brave enough to walk through the fire. What did you think of Sebastian's redemption? Do you think he deserved Serafina's forgiveness after everything he did in the beginning? I want to hear your thoughts. If you were Serafina, would you have left him at the carriage, or would you have stayed? Let me know in the comments below. Type Ice Duke if you made it all the way to the end, so I know you're a true fan of the channel. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new romance drama. I have another scandalous historical story coming next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next chapter.